Welcome to the Savvy Dentist podcast with Dr. Jessie Green, the show where great dentistry meets great business. Listen in each week as we bring you an inspiring person who will share their story, ideas and business techniques to help you create a practice and a life you love. And now introducing your host, Dr. Jessie Green.
Hello everyone, it's Jessie Green here. Welcome back to SavvyDentist.com and to the Savvy Dentist podcast. I'm so delighted to have you here for another episode of the show with us. Now, this episode is part of our summer series, and during our summer series, what we're doing is we're going through the archives and we're taking vignettes or snippets of different episodes and we're combining them to form one episode around a particular theme. The theme for this particular episode is all on mindset. And mindset's really, really critical, as I'm sure you can appreciate that the inner game, the mental game, is really where the game of business is won and lost. We can have all the external factors in our favor, but if our inner game, our mental game is not up to speed, then that kind of counts for nothing. So in this episode, I'm joined by a couple of absolute legends who are going to share their insights, their experiences around developing winning mindsets. We're going to be speaking to the chief psychologist for the Australian Olympic team. We're going to be talking to Dr. Jenny Brockis about building a thriving mind. We're going to be talking to one of my great mentors, Dr. Demartini, about living an inspired life. We're going to be talking about resilience with shark attack survivors and overcoming adversity. And we're going to be talking with Robert Owens, who's a pararescueman, which is the equivalent of the Navy SEALs in the US Air Force. And he's going to be talking about how to be unstoppable. And all of these guests, all of them are sharing their insights, their experiences about how to become mentally tough, how to become anti-fragile, because the one thing that we know in life is that nothing is certain. There will always be setbacks. There will always be adversity. Very rarely does life go in a straight line. Very rarely is it always smooth sailing. So we've got to have a really sharp inner game to be able to cope with that, to focus on the things that matter, to be able to deal with the things that crop up from time to time, and to keep moving forward no matter what. So I hope you really enjoy this episode because there's tons and tons of gold in it. So do have a pen and paper handy. But as I always say, it's not just writing the notes, it's applying what you learn. So please do apply what you learn from these guests. And I know that it's going to help you elevate your practice, your life, your existence to a whole level that you may not even have thought possible. So without any further ado, here's our episode for the summer series on mindset. Yeah, let's unpack a bit of that, because I think the lessons between sport and business are uncanny, and I think that there's lots of crossover and lots of parallels. And I'm curious to start with discipline just as a starting point. Discipline is one of those things that there's a great Jim Rohn quote, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but he had this quote that says, "You can either suffer the discipline or suffer regret." Or words to that effect. I can't remember exactly. The pain of discipline versus the pain of regret. Yep. And I wanted to ask you about discipline. Is it factory installed, or do people kind of learn to develop discipline over time?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I mean, I guess what you see with athletes is you're often working with people who are quite young. So you've got the natural psychological maturation process as well. But even some of the early psychological literature suggests that kids who've got levels of ability to withhold gratification, for example, early on in life, so in other words, to put in the work now to get the reward later, become more successful. The longitudinal studies tell us that. So there's a level of, I think, nature and early nurture, if you like. But then for other athletes, there's nothing like, as we would say, if I could be sort of slightly crude, getting their butts kicked a few times in public in big competitions. There's nothing quite like that to get a few to really flip. And I think Federer was probably one example of that, who was quite erratic early in his career. But as a consequence of a couple of life experiences, he recognized that need to then double down. But it's also not a rigid, and I'm sure we'll talk about this here. It's not a rigidity of discipline, but it's the ability to be able to put your focus where you need to put your focus. And when it all boils down, I mean, if somebody says to me, what's the single most important thing in high performance? It's focus. It's your ability to focus your attention, your energy on what it is that you're doing at the moment. And the question is, am I doing the right thing? Or am I in habits or patterns that are no longer helpful? And I'm sure, again, we'll talk about that in the context of professionals, working on their craft versus working on their business and working on their relationships and working on their team and a variety of other things. The question is, how do I provide that focus? And that's where often perspective comes in. So you'll often find good athletes have good coaches or good mentors, people that can provide them with some of that perspective, because it's damn hard to get that perspective when you're in the maelstrom, when you're in the kind of the storm.
Yeah, I really like the idea of the ability to focus on the right things at the right time to get the right results.
Yeah.
And as you say, sometimes getting that external perspective is going to be key to give you the indicator of what to focus on. In terms of discipline, you said it was not a rigidity. We're not talking about rigid discipline. We're not thinking like we've got to sleep in a wooden timber bed with no mattress and, be out pack marching in the morning. So if it's not a rigid discipline, can you just help me understand and help the audience understand, what do you mean by perhaps a more flexible kind of discipline? What do you mean by that? Is it about being able to focus on and turn it off? Is it about, what does it mean?
There's a few elements to it. I mean, one's the ability to handle discomfort. So in other words, not to switch off. It's not to switch off motivation, perseverance, etc., because it's hard and because it feels uncomfortable. I mean, particularly for young athletes, they will find that their friends are out partying, their friends are out doing things, but they're not. So there's that level of discipline. There's then the ability to make the right choices. So, if you look at the data on top tennis players, for example, the difference between the number of points won by, say, the top 10 and the next 30 or so is not very much at all. It's extremely small. But when you then get down to who wins the big points, that's when the top 10 come in.
Yeah.
Again, I know I'm coming back to the same thing, but there's a discipline to be able to apply your focus in that moment. I mean, you talk to some of the best sort of psychologists doing research work around the world, and a lot of that work is around mindfulness. And while that can have a whole lot of other connotations to it, the essence of mindfulness is the ability to be able to be in that present moment, focus on what you're doing. And in many ways, training your focus is like doing kind of push-ups for your mind. It's the ability to do that. But then, of course, what's going on for all of us, we've all got this natural threat response. We're all wired to, when we're put into difficult, challenging situations, whether that's a professional looking at their day going, I've got really complex challenges, I've got so many of these, and now I've got an interpersonal issue to deal with a staff member, or equally an athlete dealing with a heckler in the crowd. That ability to be able to contain your own attention onto what you need to focus on, but it can't be too tunnel visioned either. Because if you're in a football field, for example, tunnel vision will get you concussion pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So it is quite situational specific, but a lot of it is that ability to focus and then the ability to be emotionally intelligent or strategically or conceptually intelligent. And I would say the same with the executives I work with. It's their, if you're a senior, I've got a couple of clients who are very senior in defence. They make life or death decisions for people. And the conversations we have a lot is around making sure that they are in the right frame of mind to be able to make those decisions. Or if they're not in the right frame of mind, how do they then, where do they get perspective from? How do they make sure that they are aware of that? Because they will also have learned if they're in the military, for example, that if you're in an urban warfare situation, for example, that ability to make a quick right decision or a quick wrong decision is a life or death decision for you and for somebody else.
Yeah. So
while that's a lot more graphic, of course, than you see in day-to-day activities, the basic principle, if I'm looking at how do I train and help an Olympic athlete to be at their best, how do I train a professional to be at their best? How do I train an executive leader or a politician or whoever? It comes down to helping them to understand their own psychology, to understand what it is that takes their focus away, what habits are helpful and what not. Because what you're trying to do is help them to be their best. You're not trying to get them to be, the best Jesse or the best Graham. You're getting them to be the best them.
Yeah.
So there is a level of self-awareness, vulnerability and openness that sort of almost lays a foundation to be tough. And it's not that I'm tough, I can put up with anything. No, you can't. We all have limits. We all have vulnerabilities. How do we work with those is one of the keys, I think, to to operating at that sort of level where you're right out there. I mean, Olympic athletes puts themselves out there. Professionals put their families, their clients, their community. They're responsible. Pilots, same thing.
I started sharing a personal story about a time when I burnt out. And I was doing this in conferences and in workshops. And the response was quite unsettling. It was unsettling because people really resonated with it. I would have people come up to me afterwards saying, Jenny, it was as if you were speaking to me. I know exactly what you went through. I have experienced that too. Or the other thing would be, I think I'm burning out and I don't know what to do. Can you give me some advice? So I'd unleashed something in that side of my work. And so eventually I decided, right, I'm going to put this in writing. So help. Yeah. Because being a professional, being a medic, let's face it, medics are horribly judgmental of each other. I'd kept my story very quiet for a long time because I feared that judgment. I feared being seen as weak or call yourself a doctor, don't you know, you need to sort of just gird your loins and carry on with stuff. But it was that very trait in myself because I'd always been a high achiever, bit of a perfectionist, always wanted to be of service of others that had led me to burnout. And I never saw it coming because I had been trained through medical school and thereafter that being a medic was tough. Being a medic required you to dig deep, to soldier on, to never give up because, you were of service to others. But I just took it too far because I was blind to the fact that I was human and had limits. I wrote the book basically as a cautionary tale, not just to doctors, but for anybody, because burnout can affect men, women, grown-ups and children. I was horrified when I realized that burnout can affect kids too. So, we need to be kinder to ourselves, more compassionate, and to recognize that because we're human, we're fallible, we're vulnerable, we stuff up, we make mistakes, and that's okay. So it's a huge lesson.
There's a lot in there, Jenny. There's a ton in there. And thank you for giving me lots of threads that it's like a jumper with lots of loose threads. I can pull on these little threads and see where we go. So thank you for that. Yeah. When you said that as a doctor, you're used to being a high achiever, a perfectionist, being of service to others, that applies equally to dentists as well. Pretty much every dentist I know is type A personality, high achiever, somewhere on the perfectionistic scale, usually at the extreme end somewhere, because if you're not perfectionistic, you become perfectionistic because precision work and so on. We tend to be very harsh critics of our own work as well. We tend to be really hard on ourselves. We can be more forgiving of other people than ourselves oftentimes.
Yes. Yeah.
I assume that's very similar for doctors and probably some other professions as well. So I want to ask you about that unique set of attributes and what does that type of person live with on a day-to-day basis that makes them perhaps a little more susceptible to burnout or some other sorts of elements of burnout that perhaps someone who's less perfectionistic might experience?
Obviously, it depends on the individual.
Of course.
But I know for me, I was constantly stressed. And I didn't appreciate, everybody's stressed, right? Because we say, oh, I'm so stressed. But I was actually living with a lot of stress that was actually manifesting itself as a low-grade chronic anxiety. But I never acknowledged it or was really aware of it. I just thought everybody was like that. But it wasn't until longer down the track that I discovered that actually, no, that's not true. That was just me. So I think the thing about doctors and dentists and other health professionals, especially when we're running our own business, there's very high expectations that we place on ourselves because it's our business, it's our baby, which is slightly different from when you're working for an employer. Now, I'm sure you've worked for employers as well as I have, and sometimes that high expectation does come from elsewhere, the external sources or your peers. But I think those are the traits that set us up for burnout.
Do you think part of the issue as well is how our identity is tied to what we do, in a sense? Is that part of the issue, do you think?
Ooh, that digs a bit deep, Jesse. Yes. In a nutshell, I live for my work. I describe myself as a recovering workaholic. I love my job. I love what I do, but I loved it too much. I became my work. My whole identity was my work. So learning to reconnect with those other facets of who I was part of the healing process later on. And it's so important because when you get, and I hear other people say, oh, Jenny, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. Burnout must be dreadful, but it's never going to apply to me because I love my job too much. And I'm thinking, whoa, stop there.
Red flag.
Yeah, big red flags. Because when you love your job too much, you give up and you sacrifice everything else in order to fulfill that desire. And the more you fuel it, the fiercer that fire burns until you burn out. So I think it's really about remembering that relationships matter. Why is it so many people in professions end up in divorce courts? Why is it so many people in professions find that, they retire and they've got nothing else in their life to do? They're at a loss because they've forgotten how to have fun and play and do all those other things that make us interesting as people. If you can only talk about work, you become a bore. I mean, who wants to go to a dinner party and listen to somebody going meh about their work all night long? One of my friends said to me after I burnt out, she said, Jenny, you're so much more fun to have at dinner parties. You used to pass out. I was so tired all the time by 9 o'clock, so I was really out of it. She said that, no, we can see the real Jenny now. And I thought, oh, that's interesting, isn't it?
When we're unstable with our emotions, we have these perturbations that vacillate, that are not authentic. And what's interesting is I've asked, maybe 50,000 people in a live seminar, maybe more, if you had 24 hours to live, what would you do with your life? And consistently, they would go to the people that have contributed to their life and appreciate them and love them. And people want to be loved and appreciated for who they are, and they want to make a difference. You can't make a difference fitting into being other people. You dilute that difference. You can only make a difference when you're unique to your own set of values. And you only really are authentic there. And if you want to be loved and appreciated for who you are, you have to be willing to be who you are. Well, otherwise, no one will know who you are.
And that's exactly right. And that comes back to the fear of breaking out from the herd a bit. And we're talking about values a lot. And you alluded to earlier, what do you surround yourself with? What do you focus on every day? What do you not have to be reminded about? What else are the clues that people listening to this audio could think about to go, actually, what are my highest values? And because here's what I suspect happens, John. I suspect people have a list of socially accepted values, and for the people listening to the audio, I'm just doing air quotes around socially accepted there. They go, it should be family, it should be this, it should be that, it should be that. Therefore, that's the thing. So I guess for those people listening to this, what clues should or could they be looking for in their own life to uncover those authentic hierarchy of values? And when I went through this exercise with you, it was really liberating for me because I got rid of the things that were socially acceptable and just got to be me. And I've really appreciated that.
Well, there have been numerous thought leaders, philosophers, psychologists that have explored axiology and the values of society. And what you find in values of society is a full spectrum. Believe it or not, everybody's needed. And it's a full spectrum. And for every individual that's dedicated to family, there's somebody that's not. And everybody dedicated to business, there's somebody that's not. And there's actually a pair of opposites necessary in the laws of similarities and differences in society called the law of heuristic escalation that's automatically there to make sure that the society is building and destroying everything so it has remodeling abilities to transform, to adapt to a changing universal environment. It's like a living organism. And just like we have metabolism made out of autonomic polarities, we have a metabolism of opposites in psychology, in society, the values. So to assume a tribal thinking of a particular location in society and think, there's my values, I have to live and fit into that, is automatically limiting. It'd be like saying, well, God was a monoglot and spoke only Arabic or only Hebrew or only this country or that, and limiting it to some anthropomorphism instead of a universal field of quantum field or something. So first of all, these social idealisms are automatically improbable. And they'll say things like peace and kind and honesty and integrity and all the basic stuff. But I have no interest in that because that is not even obtainable. There's no such thing as an honest person. Diogenes traveled all over in time of Socrates and Plato looking around for an honest person all over Europe and never found one. We're all skewed things with subjective biases. I prove that in my programs weekly. So setting those are not really going to get you any other except internal conflict and moral hypocrisies. But looking carefully at what your life really, truly, objectively demonstrates does. So I look at how do you fill your space? Because things that are really valuable to you, you keep around you. And things that aren't, you discard. I look at where you spend your time. You find time, make time, spend time on things that are really valuable to you. You run out of time for things that aren't. I always find time for my research and teaching, but not for socializing and partying and stuff like that. Not important to me. You look at where you're energized, because when you're doing things high in your values, your energy goes up. When you're doing things low in your values, your energy drains. I look at where you spend your money. You find money, make money, spend money, and get money, and will even borrow money for things that are really valuable to you, but you will not spend a dime on something that doesn't provide a value. I look at what you are ordered in, because things that are really high in your value, you put into structure and you put patterns of order to it. I look at where you're disciplined spontaneously. Nobody has to remind you to do it. Nobody has to remind me to do my research and teaching. I do it every single day, 7 days a week. But you'd have to remind me to drive a car. I haven't driven that in 30-something years.
Wow.
And so you also look at what you think about how you would love your life that actually shows evidence of coming true. Not what you're thinking about that you self-depreciate. That's not happening. But what are you thinking about? So I've been thinking since I was 17 of traveling the world and teaching. That's coming true. That's true. But I've also thought about being an international sex symbol. None of that's true. There is no sex symbol.
There's still time, John. There's still time.
Yeah, there's conversation about it. It's a joke anyway.
Yeah,
but the point is, you look at what you think about how you want your life that shows evidence coming true. Then you look at what are you visualizing in your mind's eye, your innermost dominant vision about how you want your life and what shows evidence coming true. What are you internally dialoguing with internal conversation about how you want your life that shows evidence coming true? It's got to have evidence. If there's no evidence, don't waste your time on it.
Yeah.
What do you love conversing with other people about most consistently? What do you keep bringing conversation to? Because you'll keep moving the conversation. People come up to you and go, how's business? How's your golf game? How's your investments? How's your relationship? How's your health? Look at what inspires you and what's common to the people who inspire you that brings tears to your eyes. Tears to your eyes.
Do you think the fact that you were a competitive surfer prior to the incident, and being a competitive surfer means you're probably pretty mentally strong, you're used to competing, you're dealing with adversity, setbacks, etc. How much of a role do you think that state of being before the accident had on your recovery post-accident?
I think it helps in two ways. I was very driven as a surfer because it's something that I was very passionate about. And I think being taught that, if you have something that you care a lot about and you want to try to achieve it, then you're going to do whatever you can to make it happen. I think that's part of it. But I think the other side of surfing in particular that helped me a lot is surfing teaches you to lose. Surfing, especially competitive surfing. Yes. And my dad used to always say surfing is such a brutal sport because after 20 minutes, half of the field goes home. So, and there's only one winner at the end of the day. So, if you've got 64 different surfers in the field, 63 of you are losers. And my surfing really came along later in life. I didn't have a successful junior career. It's something that came on when I was like sort of 20 to 22 years old. Yep. So I spent a lot of time losing. And I think the ability to know how to bounce back from that and to want to keep pushing forward despite, there's always that negative feedback of losing and not being as good as the person next to you, I think was something that probably helped me with the tenacity that you need to get up every single day and to keep pushing ahead. And I think that does really relate to what I said before. Like if it's something that you care enough about, that means a lot to you, and you kind of lead into different conversations about purpose and greater, wider goal setting methods. But the ability to have these things in life that you truly care about is one thing, but then knowing you're going to have setbacks along the way is it's part of it.
It's really interesting. I've got a daughter who's a competitive gymnast, and anyone listening to the podcast when I talk about that a bit. And in terms of setbacks and all those things, it's the same sort of thing. Like one false move in an apparatus, the whole meet's kind of done. And so it's really high pressure and not much margin for error. And as she says herself, is learning to lose is as important as learning to win.
Yeah.
And the sports psych that she sees is kind of really helping her cope with setbacks, because I think if you can deal with a setback in life, and of course I wouldn't call your event a setback. It's obviously a setback, but it's way more than a setback. But learning to deal with setbacks in life is, I think, a really good predictor for success. The people that I've seen achieve wonderful things in their lives in all endeavours have all had to deal with some sort of setback. And so getting okay with that is good. You've been working with Scott, the physio. He sent you this incredible message. You've set these mini goals, and obviously each goal is a step up from the previous one. I want to talk about getting back in the water. How was that? I got asked this question yesterday, and it's something that I've thought about, but the way to answer it is kind of different now to what I used to, because I used to say, like, I'd put so much time and effort into it up until that point that I'd just jump in. But the reality is there's still the doubts that you have there. And those doubts are kind of seeded in what you think of yourself. But more importantly for me, the doubts kind of came from comparing myself to the surfer that I was before. And these are all things that in the moment I was confronted with, because I didn't see the day that I was allowed to go surfing coming from a long way out. Like, it actually caught me by surprise. It happened, as I said, 5 months into this recovery journey. Yep. And at that stage, I had kind of reached this place where things were starting to plateau a little bit. And, I'm working harder and harder in the gym, trying to get better, but the gains just get smaller. And when that happens, there's always this inevitable point where you start to question what's possible and if you're going to be able to reach that final destination. And I remember walking into physio that day, and I was doing my stretches, and Scott walks over, and I think he knows that we're kind of getting to this point. And he just simply says, like, "Oh, see if you can stand up as if you're on a surfboard." And I try it the first time and do a pretty average job at it. He says, "Maybe give it another go." And I do a little bit better the second time. But when I wasn't prepared at all for him to then say, "I think you should go for a surf," because like there's obviously the excitement that comes from that, and the fact that it comes out of nowhere is amazing. But then I was really kind of flooded by those doubts. And what I do next is I call my friend Nick. For two reasons. One, because he said, "When you can go for a surf, let me know." But the second reason is actually because I felt like I wanted to talk to someone about these doubts. And that's something I'd learned quite a lot through my journey, is when you are going through the doubts or those tough days, that to just engage the support that's around you, because getting a different perspective on it, that was very, very helpful for me throughout the recovery. So I called Nick mainly with the idea of talking to him about these doubts that I had. And I made the mistake of opening up the conversation with, "Scott said I can go for a surf." That's all that Nick wanted to hear. And he was just pumped. He was like, "Oh, that's so good. I'll get a surfboard. I'll come pick you up. We'll go." And he just hung up. And so it's kind of like, I had these doubts, but also I was kind of just being thrown in the deep end. And before I knew it, Nick was there picking me up, and we were on our way to the beach. And we did get time to talk about those doubts in the car on the way down. But sure. It's something where I think because it came out of nowhere, I didn't have time to overthink it before I got in the water. Like, I still thought it would be months, maybe even years before I could surf again at the time. Like, I didn't really know how I was supposed to be feeling to get back in the water. And I think it goes to show, these breakthroughs, they might not happen at the time that you expect a lot of the times. Sometimes they might happen early, sometimes they might happen late, but it just kind of, for me, reinforces the fact that you still show up every day and you do the work, regardless of where the end point is meant to be. And then having the right support around you whenever you do get to that ultimate point is very important. One of the things that I've observed in business is that we are often not training enough. We're kind of getting onto the field of play without having done the training, because we go into day-to-day work, which is almost the competitive environment, if you will, without taking the time to train. So I wanted to ask you, because I know we're talking about this with sports and special ops and all the rest of it. So just to put that into a business context, how does that training look from a business perspective? What do you see successful business owners doing? Because I know you work with successful business owners as well. How do they incorporate this into their day-to-day?
I find that most companies don't have good culture.
Yeah. And
it starts off with hiring. And if you don't tell them what the culture is going to be, they bring their culture to your organization, right? Because everybody has a culture of how they do stuff. Late, good, excellent, shoddy, excuse-minded, whatever it is. And if you don't set the culture up front for the expectation, then you bring 50 people in with 50 different cultures and their way they worked at the last job or the last 5 jobs. Then you just find this disconnect and this tension where people just don't treat each other right, don't honor each other right, don't talk the way they should to each other, communicate, serve. It's all for yourself. And so if you don't do that, if you don't get your business squared away, where you lay down, this is how we act, this is how we respond. Like I was doing a job in San Jose, and it was a security group, and they wanted me to come in to bring together 5 corporate offices into one culture, and each of the 5 offices wanted to sell their hamburger differently, right? Wow. They all said, this is the way we do a McDonald's hamburger in Seattle, and this is how we do a McDonald's hamburger in Sacramento. We get 2 pickles here, we get 3 pickles up there, we get no mustard down here, and we're all selling the same widget, right? The same thing. And I go and I see all these cubicles, and I see these people in cubicles with their headsets on and stuff. And I come to realize that all they do is email and text each other. And I say to this lady who's got a wall here, a cubicle with another lady over there, with another lady over there, I say, do you ever get up and just go talk to them, or do you always have to send a text message? We send text messages. Well, why don't you just get up and come find out we don't like each other? So we endure each other, and we just do what we have to do, the basics, to not have to really get interactive. And then the clicks go over here, and click goes over here, and the click drink over here, and this group goes over here, and they're polarized. So if you don't work on what makes a successful team or a successful culture, you're always scrambling, trying to prop things up because people they're not on the same page. That's why when you go into our military academy, they say, I don't care whatever you are, once you're in here, you're going to be an armyman. Yeah. And this is what West Point demands of you. I don't care what's your background, what you've done before. When you get out of here 4 years or 5 years, you're not going to be whatever you were. You're going to be an Army person thinking like we want you to think and acting like we want you to act. Got it? And they go, big guys, I guess. And then this transformation happens of what's expected and accountability. And so business is a team. And most businesses don't act like a team. They act like a management structure.
Oh, that's a write it down. That's something to write down, ladies and gents. Most businesses act like a management structure, not as a team. That is a real pearl of wisdom. Just expand on that, please.
You can say, I thought that up. Someone said one time.
No, that's definitely Robert Owens. Can you just expand on that? Because I think that's a really key point, and I just want to make sure we explore that, because I think that's a really important distinction.
I, maybe like you and others listening, I'm fascinated with teams. I'm fascinated with good teams. I'm fascinated with how adding a different coach can take a last place team to the first place in a year or two. I'm always interested in how they take components out and put components in, and why teams in some cities stay at the bottom forever, culture. Yep. So when I get into businesses, I look at the employees, and I look at the president, and I look at the structure, and my first assessment is this thing running like a team, or is it running as just a management, whether it's a V from the bottom up or the angle down the pyramid this way, power structure, are they acting out of their silos and their job descriptions, versus are we acting like everyone is in this together and we care for all of us the same, the catcher, the pitcher, the batsman, whatever it is, are we one? And most of the time it starts with the leader on top And it's not. He does his job and he expects other people to do their job. And there's a disconnect. I am one that's big on servant leadership, where wherever you are, you serve the people around you. You just don't use them, and you just don't treat them like they're objects, but you treat them like they're people.
Hey there, I really hope you enjoyed that episode from the summer series. I hope you took some great notes, but most importantly, I hope you apply what you learned as a result of listening to the guests on the show. Now, if you want to set up your next 12 months to be the most successful ever, then I'm going to encourage you to think about putting a strategic plan in place. No matter what your definition of success is, it's going to be important that you have a plan. So whether you want to increase your revenue, whether you want to enhance your profitability, whether you want to have more free time for better work-life balance, maybe you want to have fuller appointment books with better marketing, or maybe it's about having your team perform at a higher level than ever before so that your experiences for your patients are better, you're able to delegate more effectively. Whatever it is for you, having the right plan in place is going to be really critical. One of the things that we know at Savvy is that the stages of growth of a business are absolutely predictable. And what that means is that the challenges encountered at any particular level of growth are really predictable, as are the solutions. We've worked with literally hundreds, if not thousands of practices over the years, and we've been able to help them achieve their business goals, their personal goals, and everything in between. But it all starts with having the right plan in place. One of the skills that we've developed is the ability to identify very clearly what the right next thing is to focus on. And so as you embark on the next 12 months, it's going to be really important that you identify what the right next thing is for you. And that's going to depend on where you are now and what your goals and ambitions are as well. And once you've identified what the right next thing or things are, it's important to identify, well, what are the potential obstacles? What are the things that could derail us? And then, of course, have a mitigation plan around that so that as you progress through the year, you can make that progress, hit those goals, achieve the milestones that are important to you. And as I said, make sure that this 12 months is the most successful ever. Now, if you would like a hand putting that plan together, could I encourage you to book a practice growth call to one of our team? All you need to do is head across to savvydentist.com/growth call. And one of our team will reach out to you and book that time. Now, during that call, they're going to be asking you some questions about what's the current state of play in your practice, what your goals and ambitions are for the next 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, and so on, so that they can align your thinking, align your resources to achieving not just the 1 year goals, but the 3 year, the 5 year, and the 10 year goals as well, so that you're setting yourself up for a fantastic future. As I said, whether it's around revenue growth, profit growth, leverage for greater free time, whatever it might be for you, that's really, really important, because ultimately what we want to create is a practice and a life that you love. And getting that right plan in place is a really critical and essential first step for that. So all you need to do is head across to savvydentist.com/growth call and book that time. And we look forward to talking to you very, very shortly. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Savvy Dentist podcast. For more episodes, go to drjessiegreen.com/savvydentist. And to discover how to build a high-performance dental practice, visit drjessiegreen.com and download the free report.